Welcome to Nerdio Manager for WVD demo of the day. In today's video, we're going to take a look at new functionality that was introduced in version 2.0.1 of the Nerdio Manager that allows you to track and monitor the savings that result from the auto-scaling capabilities of the Nerdio Manager. Auto-scaling capabilities are part of dynamic host pool functionality, and as long as auto-scaling is enabled and configured, it will dynamically shut down, turn on, delete, and create the needed capacity in terms of session host VMs to respond to the user demand in real time. Once auto-scaling is enabled, you are able to take a look at how much savings the auto-scale configuration is actually resulting in. That can be found on the screen called Autoscale History, which is what we're going to be looking at today. Before we look at this particular screen, let's pick a particular host pool. It's going to be called Field Apps in our particular case. And let's take a look at the Manage Autoscale screen, which is where the autoscale configuration is set up. So here we can see that we're using a particular desktop image in a particular network, which determines the region that it's in. A VM size that we're using is a 4-core, 16 gig of RAM D4S v3, and we're using a 128 gigabyte standard SSD E10 disk. We configure the base capacity to have 5 VMs, and we have minimum active host capacity of 0, which means that when there is no demand on the system after business hours or on the weekends, the system will automatically shut down all of its capacity. And we've also allowed the system to have 2 extra VMs that can be built on top of the 5 that are the base as needed. And we have some scaling logic that basically pre-stages our capacity of 6, which is the 5 base VMs plus 1 of the burst VMs, Monday through Sunday at 12 p.m. And then if there's no demand on the system at 1 p.m., it starts scaling in and removing that capacity. So we're basically only running the system 1 hour per day, 7 days a week. So let's take a look at what type of savings this actually results in. So we'll go back to the dynamic host pool screen, and we will pull up the autoscale history from the drop-down menu. And what you can see on this screen is a lot of useful information, including the savings that we're going to be focusing on today. So the first thing you can see here is this blue line, which shows us the base capacity of 5 VMs, this dashed blue line right here. We have a purple line, which shows us the peak capacity, meaning how many VMs at the maximum were deployed and provisioned and running during the selected time range, which is listed right here. We can look at it today, yesterday, this week, or at a particular custom range. Then we have something called burst capacity or max capacity, which is this red line, which in our case is 6. So what we see here is even though our base capacity is 5, the blue line, our peak capacity reached 6 because we told the system to provision 6 VMs by 12 p.m. And our max capacity is actually 7, which is 5 plus 2, but we've never actually reached that capacity during the selected time frame, which is today. Then if we scroll down, we have some CPU usage information, we have user session information, and finally, our savings calculation. So what we can see here is that up until 12 p.m. or so, or slightly before 12 p.m., which is when it starts provisioning that extra capacity, we are saving 100% of compute. Why 100%? Because none of the VMs are running. So if we had a static host pool, in order to provide this type of capacity even for 1 hour, we would need to make sure that we are running at this purple line, which is 6 VMs to be available. But because up until 12 p.m., we had no VMs available, we're saving 100% compute. And we're also saving a little bit of storage because we only have 5 VMs that currently exist. And we're going to be adding 1 on demand, which is why that 17% is that additional VM that's currently not existing. And then as the system gets to close to 12 p.m., it determines how many minutes are needed to pre-stage that needed capacity. It powers on the 5 VMs. and it builds the sixth one. And you can see that happening right here. It runs for an hour, which is what we needed, and then it starts scaling down. Roughly every 5 minutes, it starts shutting down this additional server, and it actually deletes one of them. And then once it's done, by about 1:38 or so in this case, the system is back to having 0 VMs of available capacity. So what does that result to? What that results to is we are actually saving 87% of our total storage and compute costs by running this auto-scaling configuration. And the system is intelligently able to pre-stage the capacity, allow it to run, and then intelligently shut it down when it's no longer needed, resulting in such a high amount of savings. If we click on the view details, we will actually see a more detailed breakdown. So what we'll see here is 3 columns, actually 4 columns. One is going to be our maximum costs. This is the cost of the system running at the red line, which is our burst capacity, when all 7 VMs would have been running. The next column is our actual peak capacity, meaning how many VMs were used during the selected time range. In this case, we're looking at 1 day, which is the purple line. And this is the actual cost that would be incurred if you were not using a dynamic host pool. If you were using a static host pool to provide this amount of capacity for even 1 hour, you would need to run it at these 6 VMs for 24 hours for the entire day. And the cost in that case would be $26.40 for compute and $1.74 for storage that would be consumed by those OS disks that were 128 gigabyte E10 standard SSD disks. Now, our actual usage in compute was only $2.07, and it was $1.46. And you can see the savings. The savings of compute were 92%. The savings in terms of storage were 16%, and the aggregate amount of savings was 87% for the day, which meant $24.60. Now, we can look at this on a weekly basis. So, for example, if we click on last week, we can see similar behavior happening every single day. And what we'll notice is we're saving a similar amount, 88% or $190 or so for the week. If we click on details, we can see that if we allow the system to run at its peak utilization, we would have spent about $215, but in reality, we spent only about $25, which resulted in such significant savings. And then as we scroll down here and we look at our savings table, we can see during what time of day and what day of week, how much we are saving precisely given our configuration. Now, if we were running a more typical configuration where capacity gets pre-staged, let's say by 8 a.m., and then gets scaled in at 6 p.m. Monday through Friday, we would expect to see a savings of about 70 to 75%, because that represents about 40, 50 hours in a week, and a typical week has 168 hours, so it would be somewhere between 70 and 75% of savings, depending on the actual behavior of the system. So the takeaway here is that the auto-scale savings is extremely significant and important when evaluating a WVD environment, because a static host pool that requires a certain amount of capacity, which is used only a fraction of the time, such as Monday through Friday, 9 to 5 or 8 to 6, is going to be running at that capacity 24/7 unless there is an intelligent auto-scaling engine that can properly shut down and remove that capacity when it's not in use. And the Nerdio auto-scale engine does exactly that and helps you fully understand what the dollar impact is of the configuration. And what's nice is you can also go into the Manage Autoscale screen, and as you make changes to your configuration, what you'll notice is that your estimated monthly costs here are the minimum and the maximum represents what the cost of this particular config would be if the system scaled out and never scaled in. The minimum configuration or the minimum estimated monthly costs represents what it would cost if the system never scaled out to begin with. So this is a handy way to see what your boundaries are in terms of cost from minimum to maximum. And then looking at the auto scale history is where you'll see the actual savings and the actual costs incurred for the selected time range. Hopefully you found this useful and informative. I will see you in a future video.